It kind of looks like maternity clothes, but I don't know, I kind of vibe with it. The weather's kind of nice for it today. I don't know. I think, and maybe this isn't a good thing,
It's hard and it's lonely, sometimes unbearably so. The kind of loneliness that makes every success feel fragile and every setback feel overwhelming. But within that emptiness lies a reminder: if loneliness can exist, then so can strength, so can hope, and so can the possibility of something better. Rachel Zegler, once hailed as Disney's newest rising star, seemed to embody that promise. She had the voice that could fill a theater, the appearance that fit the fairy tale image, and the charm of someone who might carry an entire generation of Disney storytelling on her shoulders. Industry insiders and fans alike whispered that she was destined to be the next golden girl of the studio. And with her casting as Snow White, a role tied not only to Disney's origins, but also to nearly a century of cinematic history, she was positioned at the very center of an enormous cultural inheritance. It wasn't just a part in a film, it was as if she had been handed the weight of Disney's entire legacy, a billion-dollar crown placed on her head before she had the chance to fully grow into it. On the surface, this should have been the ultimate Cinderella story, a modern-day fairy tale unfolding on the biggest stage imaginable. But reality proved far messier, and what was expected to be a dream soon began to resemble a cautionary tale. Disney invested staggering sums, reportedly close to $250 million in production alone, not even counting the additional millions spent on global marketing campaigns, aggressive social media pushes, influencer collaborations, and wall-to-wall promotional takeovers in theaters. The studio didn't just want to remake a classic. It wanted to rebrand it for a new era, to reshape one of its most beloved stories into something that could resonate across generations. Yet, for all the money and effort poured into it, the film began to wobble under the weight of its own ambition. Insiders spoke of constant tension behind the scenes, describing the project as trapped in what one source memorably called a slow-motion identity crisis. Scripts were rewritten again and again, often at the last minute, as executives clashed over tone, theme, and message. Scenes that had been celebrated in early drafts were torn apart, only to be stitched back together in altered forms that felt increasingly disjointed. Test audiences left confused rather than enchanted, their lukewarm reactions sending waves of panic through the studio. In desperation, Disney brought in Robert Darrow for reshoots, hoping to salvage key sequences that had failed to land. What began as the revival of a treasured fairy tale gradually transformed into something else entirely, a mirror reflecting the uncertainty and contradictions within modern Hollywood itself. The story of Snow White, a tale once meant to inspire joy and wonder, had become tangled in debate, revisions, and doubt. Instead of feeling like the smooth continuation of Disney's magical tradition, it stood as a reminder of how fragile that magic can be when weighed down by pressure, ambition, and the crushing expectations of millions watching from the outside. Was this film meant to be political, feminist, or simply magical enough to keep toy marketers happy? That was the unanswered question hanging over the entire production. Even the most iconic symbol of the tale, the poisoned apple, became a symbol of the studio's indecision. According to multiple insiders, it was redesigned not once, not twice, but 4 separate times, each change reflecting yet another attempt to balance nostalgia with modern expectations. Should it look frightening and mysterious, as in the original? Should it be softened into something more symbolic and less threatening for children? Or should it be repurposed entirely as a metaphor for empowerment? The debates seemed endless, and the final product carried the weight of that creative tug-of-war. When the film finally debuted, there was a brief flicker of hope. Opening night numbers came in at $3.5 million, which wasn't spectacular by Disney standards, but suggested there might be an audience willing to embrace the reimagining. Yet that glimmer didn't last long. The box office collapse was swift and merciless. On streaming, things looked marginally better at first. In its first week on Disney+, the film logged nearly 500 million minutes of viewing time. On the surface, that sounded impressive, until closer analysis revealed a harsher reality. Most people hadn't actually finished watching it. Audiences were abandoning the film halfway through, leaving it to languish unfinished in streaming queues. Very few viewers added it to their favorites or returned for a second watch. Instead of becoming a family favorite, the movie turned into a curiosity, a title people clicked on just to see if it was truly as bad as the rumors suggested. And what they discovered often drove them away frustrated, irritated, or outright bored. This wasn't merely a disappointing release. It was the definition of a hate watch, a cultural event where curiosity outweighed enjoyment, and where the buzz came not from admiration, but from ridicule. The critics weren't any kinder. Professional reviewers handed it a crushing 29% score on Rotten Tomatoes, while general audiences scored it even lower at 19%. IMDb users, never shy with their opinions, dismissed it as cringeworthy, unwatchable, and painful. Parents, the core of Disney's family audience, delivered perhaps the most devastating blow. Many reported that their children couldn't stay engaged, with one parent sharing how their 6-year-old bluntly muttered, "This is boring," less than an hour into the film. For a company that had built its empire on captivating children's imaginations, such feedback was catastrophic. Disney could spin numbers, they could spin marketing, but they couldn't spin the truth that even kids didn't want to sit through it. And caught in the middle of all this was Rachel Zegler. Her face, her voice, her presence were inescapable, plastered on every billboard, trailer, and streaming thumbnail, promoted in every press junket and late-night interview. Yet instead of being celebrated as the new face of Disney magic, she became the lightning rod for criticism. Comments she had made in earlier interviews, remarks that might have once gone unnoticed, were dragged back into the spotlight, dissected, and weaponized against her. For Rachel, the release was not a triumphant coronation, but a trial by fire, as the fairy tale crown she had been handed seemed to grow heavier with every headline, every viral clip, and every angry comment from fans who felt the magic had been lost. In one interview, Rachel casually dismissed the 1937 original Snow White as strange. In another, she referred to the prince as a stalker, a remark that might have been intended as lighthearted banter, but came across as cutting to Disney's most loyal fans. To those who had grown up cherishing the original film, this wasn't seen as clever Gen Z humor or a refreshing new perspective. It felt like an attack on their childhood. They didn't see an actress playfully reinterpreting a classic. They saw someone mocking the story that had shaped their earliest memories and family traditions. For them, Rachel wasn't just critiquing a film, she was ridiculing a cultural milestone. The backlash was immediate and relentless. Social media lit up with memes, many exaggerated and taken out of context, but powerful enough to sway public opinion. TikTok edits looped her words over sarcastic music, Twitter threads compiled her quotes into scathing critiques, and YouTube commentary channels churned out video after video dissecting her interviews. The term woke white began circulating as a mocking label, used not just to criticize Rachel, but also to frame Disney's broader attempt at rebranding its classics. What should have been simple promotional sound bites turned into viral ammunition. Every press junket, every red carpet clip, every half smile or awkward pause was clipped, repackaged, and transformed into a punchline. Suddenly, Rachel wasn't just promoting a film, she was defending herself from an internet onslaught. What was supposed to be a crowning moment in her career quickly deteriorated into an avalanche of online criticism. But the negativity didn't stay at the level of film reviews or box office speculation. It became personal, uncomfortably so. The line between Rachel the actress and Snow White the character blurred, and in the eyes of the public, she became inseparable from the $200 million train wreck that bore her image. When audiences were disappointed, they didn't just attack the movie, they came for her. And the more she tried to explain herself, the worse it seemed to get. Every attempt to speak out only added fuel to the fire, sparking fresh rounds of memes, think pieces, and angry reaction videos. The fairy tale crown that Disney had placed on her head began to feel like a curse. Yet Rachel didn't retreat into silence. She remained vocal, determined to tell her side of the story. She offered explanations, clarified her remarks, and tried to pull back the curtain on what it felt like to endure this kind of storm at such a young age. She wanted to stand out as more than just a headline or a soundbite. She wanted to show her humanity. In one particularly vulnerable interview, Rachel laid herself bare. She admitted openly that she was struggling, not just with the backlash, but with her own mental and emotional health. She described herself as a very mentally sick person trying desperately to keep it together, confessing that she felt completely alone in the chaos. The noise, she said, never seemed to stop. It followed her everywhere, drowning out any sense of peace or stability. Such raw honesty might have been expected to spark compassion, to soften the criticism and remind people that behind the character and the controversies was a real young woman trying to cope. But the internet was not in a forgiving mood. Her words were quickly clipped, shared, and stripped of context. What was meant as a moment of vulnerability became fodder for yet another round of mockery. On Instagram, Reels turned her emotional confessions into ironic memes. On YouTube, reaction channels twisted her pain into entertainment. On TikTok, her interviews were cut into bite-sized edits, remixed with sarcastic captions and sound effects designed to elicit laughs rather than sympathy. Instead of breaking the cycle of negativity, her fragility fed it, giving audiences fresh material to ridicule. What should have been a moment of understanding only deepened the nightmare. Her honesty didn't bring her relief. It made her struggle part of the spectacle. Rachel had tried to reveal the truth of her experience, but the internet was more interested in a viral moment than a human story. The fairy tale had not only collapsed, it had been turned into a meme factory with Rachel at the very center of it. What should have been an unfiltered, unguarded human moment, an actress bearing her soul, was swiftly twisted into internet fodder. Instead of empathy, Rachel's words were cut up, repackaged, and served back as jokes. Influencers lip-synced her interviews as if they were auditioning for sketch comedy, mocking her vulnerability for likes and shares. Content creators layered her breakdown over ironic music, chuckling as they stitched her pain into viral clips. On a platform where sincerity rarely thrives, pity was never going to win. The algorithm rewards sarcasm, cynicism, and the bite of a joke, not the fragility of an overwhelmed young actress. Behind the scenes, Rachel quietly sought help. She began treatment, leaning on medication to manage her anxiety, trying to steady herself in a storm that felt endless. In an interview with People magazine, she admitted she simply wanted to feel safe again, to walk through the world without fear, to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But the timing was merciless. Each time she tried to move forward, a fresh clip resurfaced, another headline reappeared, and more hate mail poured in. Every attempt at healing was interrupted by the cycle of outrage, and while Rachel was left to absorb the blows, Disney seemed to evaporate into thin air. The studio that had once trumpeted her as the face of a billion-dollar franchise quietly backed away, pressing the eject button without so much as a goodbye. The once ubiquitous merchandise disappeared from big box retailers. Target and Walmart pulled dolls from their shelves. Theme parks quietly removed her signature costumes from souvenir shops. Marketing campaigns vanished. There were no poster relaunches, no soundtrack push, no redemption arc, no late-stage ad blitz to soften the narrative. The silence from Disney was deafening. The only acknowledgement came in passing, during a lackluster earnings call when CEO Bob Iger brushed the entire ordeal aside with a single line: "Our purpose is to provide entertainment, not to forward any cause." That was it. No mention of Rachel, no acknowledgement of the film's implosion. Just a corporate shrug that left both the star and the story dangling in the void. Rachel was not officially canceled, nor was she openly dropped. Instead, she was left in a strange limbo, her career suspended in uncertainty. Hollywood insiders had a name for it: being on ice. Others were less polite, calling it Hollywood jail, a quiet exile where projects dried up, calls slowed, and offers never quite materialized. Her team continued to strategize, floating new ideas and chasing fresh opportunities, but the industry wasn't biting. The studio that had once anointed her as the next Disney princess now acted as though she had never worn the crown at all. That area of Hollywood where your name still technically appears on casting lists, but is never actually spoken aloud, is one of the strangest and most suffocating forms of punishment the industry has to offer. It's not loud, it's not official, and it's certainly not written into any rulebook. Instead, it's a quiet kind of exile, a shadow that follows you into every room. There is no public statement, no formal blacklist, no angry mob demanding your removal, just silence, an absence of phone calls, a polite pause in conversations when your name is mentioned. It is the kind of silence that says everything without saying a word. Executives won't take the chance. Studios, networks, and producers don't want to be the first to test the waters. They'd rather wait, hold off, let time pass, and observe if the noise fades away. They ask themselves the same questions in boardrooms. Will the dust settle? Will the public forget? Will the internet move on to its next target? But the internet is not built to forget. Not built to forget. Not.
I am coloring my character Elian with her cute little sidekick Flink. This is, I think, her second costume in the movie.
Anymore. The digital world is an echo chamber that keeps replaying the same moments, the same mistakes, the same controversies. And in Rachel's case, every clip, every meme, every critical headline has been archived, replayed, and permanently tied to her name. This is not a new phenomenon. Hollywood has a history of freezing out actors without ever admitting that's what it's doing. Katherine Heigl, once one of the most bankable rom-com stars, saw her career stall after a string of interviews and comments soured her reputation. Shia LaBeouf, who had once been positioned as the next major action star, slipped off studio shortlists after court cases and troubling headlines. Gina Carano, who rose to fame on The Mandalorian, vanished from Disney projects after her social media controversies spiraled out of control. All of them were sidelined, sometimes permanently, by a toxic cocktail of bad timing, bad press, and industry hesitation. Rachel Zegler's case is different, and in some ways even sadder. She didn't commit a crime. She didn't implode publicly. She didn't burn bridges with directors or storm off sets. Instead, she became the face of a project that went off the rails, and when the train crashed, she was the one left standing on the tracks. She didn't choose this burden, but she carried it all the same, and it crushed her. And that's the most painful irony. Rachel is talented, unquestionably talented. Her singing voice, her ability to capture emotion on screen, her charisma in live performances, these are gifts most actors would kill to have. But in Hollywood, talent alone is never enough. The industry rewards timing above all else, and timing is merciless. It doesn't matter how much potential you hold if the script is weak, the press tour spirals, the film collapses, or the internet paints you as the villain of the story. Once your name is associated with baggage, the offers stop coming. And Rachel's name, once a symbol of Disney's bright new future, now feels unbearably heavy. For decades, being chosen to play a Disney princess was one of the most reliable springboards into stardom. It meant magazine covers, late-night interviews, iconic career-making roles, and a level of cultural immortality that other actors envied. To wear the crown was to be chosen, to be celebrated, to be untouchable. For Rachel, it should have been her coronation. Instead, it became her undoing. Portraying Snow White didn't open doors for her, it quietly closed them. Now she finds herself trapped in a peculiar Hollywood limbo. She hasn't been canceled outright, but she hasn't been redeemed either. Studios aren't openly rejecting her, but they aren't embracing her either. She's not poisonous enough to be erased from the conversation, but she isn't safe enough to headline the next project. She exists in the gray area where no one is quite sure what to do with her. And in that strange, uncomfortable silence, careers don't just pause, they wither. Although Rachel hadn't committed any crime, insulted anyone personally, or done anything so outrageous that it should have warranted permanent exile, she still found herself overshadowed by a dense, unshakable cloud. In Hollywood, perception often matters far more than facts, and her name had quietly become associated with risk. Studios didn't want to be the first to take the leap. That's the unwritten law of the industry. No one wants to go first. Being the first to give the green light on a controversial star, the first to extend a role, or the first to declare, "We believe in her comeback," comes with enormous risk. If it fails, the executive who made that decision is remembered as the fool who bet wrong. In a business where reputations are fragile and careers hinge on a single misstep, hesitation becomes the default. Everyone waits, eyes shifting side to side, hoping someone else takes the plunge first. Her team, recognizing that silence could be just as damaging as criticism, began advocating for a carefully plotted reset. They knew that Rachel couldn't afford another high-profile billion-dollar franchise on her shoulders. Not yet. Instead, they pitched her for gritty, low-budget indie dramas, the kinds of films that win festival buzz and prove an actor's raw ability. They reached out to directors known for taking chances on talent, suggested collaborations that would strip away the glitz and showcase her as an artist rather than a product. They floated her name for small passion projects, for roles in streaming series, even for voice acting gigs in animated features. Anything that might allow her to work without carrying the unbearable weight of Snow White's failure. But there was a catch. Without a compelling comeback story already in motion, studios weren't willing to gamble. Hollywood is a machine that feeds on narrative, and Rachel's narrative was still unfinished. Without a redemption arc for the press to latch onto, no one was ready to invest. It became a brutal loop. No job without the comeback, and no comeback without the job. Even her social media presence reflected the shift. Where her feed had once been filled with glamorous red carpet photos, promotional stills, and high-energy content designed to fuel the Disney machine, Her posts became quieter, more genuine, and deliberately subdued. She attempted to show her human side, offering glimpses into everyday life, moments of honesty, even vulnerability. Yet in a world where millions were watching her every move through the lens of mockery, even authenticity was dangerous. Every post risked becoming content for critics. Every sentence could be clipped and twisted into the next viral meme. For someone trying to re-establish trust with the public, the internet's microscope turned even the most harmless gesture into potential ammunition. And while Rachel fought for footing, the studio itself was reeling. Snow White had not just dented Disney's bottom line, it had bruised its identity. For decades, Disney had been synonymous with carefully polished stories and unshakable cultural power. But this failure forced executives to second-guess everything: their remakes, their marketing, their reliance on nostalgia. Entire projects already in mid-production were suddenly halted or rewritten. Riskier ideas were abandoned altogether. An insider called it the tipping moment, a point where Disney's leadership realized they could no longer assume success simply by stamping the Disney name on a property. And within that reckoning, Rachel became the easiest symbol to point to. It hardly mattered that she wasn't the one rewriting scripts, reshooting scenes, or strategizing multi-million-dollar campaigns. To the public, she was the face of the failure. To executives, she was the cleanest scapegoat. And in an industry built on perception, symbols often matter more than facts. Rachel didn't just star in Snow White, she carried it on her back. And when it collapsed, the wreckage buried her along with it. When you become the face of a cinematic misfire, this is the brutal reality. The spotlight that once promised stardom transforms into a magnifying glass, burning you from every angle. The responsibility is shifted, the narrative simplified, and all the nuance erased. Who actually authored the script is irrelevant to the media. Which producer made the call to change key scenes or adjust the tone is invisible to the audience. The complexities of studio decision-making never make headlines. What people remember is the person who carried the story in front of the camera, the one whose face was plastered on the posters, whose sound bites looped endlessly on social media, whose interviews and late-night appearances kept the machine running. That person was Rachel Zegler. She became the unintentional protagonist of the entire fiasco. And when the story collapsed, so did the perception of her career. Rachel's presence was everywhere during that press cycle. Viral clips circulating on TikTok, reaction edits on YouTube, snappy quotes rebranded as memes, glossy interviews, promotional trailers, and billboards looming over city streets. She was the visible thread woven through every aspect of the campaign. Whether she wanted it or not, she carried the burden of recognition. And in the aftermath, when audiences felt betrayed or disappointed, the backlash clung to her like a shadow she could not shake. Yet despite the mainstream retreat, she has not been completely abandoned. In hidden corners of the internet, dedicated fans continue to support her. Online communities share her early audition tapes, marvel at her untrained but arresting vocal power, and revisit her West Side Story performance with admiration. These loyal supporters remind each other why she was chosen for Snow White in the first place, but they are outnumbered by the silence of the broader public. And in Hollywood, silence is more damning than active hatred. Hatred at least keeps you relevant. It means people are still talking about you. Silence is worse. Silence is the industry's way of saying, we've moved on. Hollywood is filled with stories of actors who have managed to claw their way back from worse. Stars once thought finished have returned stronger, buoyed by an unexpected casting choice, a role that redefined them, or even a 30-second viral clip that changed the way audiences saw them overnight. A single breakout moment can flip the narrative entirely. That's the paradox of this business. Careers collapse suddenly, but they can also revive just as suddenly if the timing is right. What Rachel needs isn't another carefully manufactured PR campaign, but a real organic turning point. Something unscripted, unforced, authentic. A performance so raw it cuts through the noise. A moment so undeniable it reminds everyone of what made her special in the first place. Because at her core, Rachel Zegler still has the qualities that propelled her to fame. The voice, the presence, the unfiltered promise of a star who can command a stage and captivate an audience. Those gifts don't disappear because of a failed film. But the question is not about her talent, it's about opportunity. Will the same Hollywood machine that built her up overnight be willing to give her the tools to rebuild? Or has the narrative already hardened, locking her in place as the symbol of one of Disney's most high-profile missteps? That is the risk of becoming a symbol. Once the story is written, rewriting it is nearly impossible. She wore the crown. She stepped into the role with everything she had. But when the kingdom collapsed around her, she was left standing alone among the ruins, bearing the blame for decisions that were never hers. Perhaps she will get another opportunity. Perhaps she will cut through the cynicism, the memes, the silence, and reclaim the story as her own. Or perhaps her tale will quietly fade, slipping into the background as little more than a whisper, remembered not as a fairy tale, but as a cautionary story of what happens when a star is crowned too early and left defenseless when the crown falls.